Okay, good evening. This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and yes, that's right, folks. We're back. We're back with the Truth Attack. Okay, I got a number of things I want to get into today, so let's just go ahead and get the preliminaries out of the way. We are the Liberty Works Radio Network, and we do need the support of the members of the listening audience to keep the network operating and the broadcasts coming. So, if you enjoy the information, the shows, the lectures, the guests on the other shows, and the fact that we're one of the few alternative media outlets that are telling you the flat out truth about the Federal Reserve Bank, the income tax, the reckless spending, the wasteful spending, and the insane liberal politics that have been driving the Democrat Party for the last 20 years. We'd sure appreciate it if you could find your way over to the LibertyWorksRadioNetwork.com website and get signed up as a subscribing member, even if it's as little as $10, $20 a month. Every membership counts and helps, and we do need your support to keep the network operating. And if you want to get fully informed on the fraudulent nature of the federal income tax, you can keep listening to these shows. Check out my YouTube channel, Thomas Freed, or find your way over to the tax-freedom.com website and start reading and getting educated on the constitutional fraud that the federal income tax has been since the end of World War II. And it's not that the tax is unconstitutional, it's that the IRS's enforcement of it is. The DOJ's arguing for the enforcement of it in court is unconstitutional. And what the federal lower courts have been ruling for the last 45 years is entirely unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court just pointed that all out in June in the Supreme Court decision, Moore et al. V. United States, and we'll be talking a bit more about that later on. So you want to get over to tax-freedom.com, start reading, find your way over to irszoom.com and check out the store there where we can provide you with document templates to help answer any piece of IRS correspondence you've received, and we can help anyone who's in court. Seriously, I'm helping a number of people now, but we can help more. But you need to contact me if you're in court over civil proceedings or criminal proceedings. It doesn't matter. We can help. So everyone should be talking this up because we've done all the work here. We've got the documents, we've got the arguments, we've got the law, we've got the Supreme Court on our side. We can shut them down in court, but you need to contact me if you need help. I don't know where you are or who you are, but everybody in the country needs to help spread the word that the fraud has been exposed by the Supreme Court. And it's all there in black and white on taxfreedom.com for anyone curious enough to want to know the truth to go and read it. And the truth is the path of God, for that is what God consists of. Truth, God's true plan for mankind, is freedom achieved through a pursuit of the truth and faith in God and that truth. And if you misplace your faith and put it into any other entity, whether it be man, philosophy, religion, kingdom, or agenda, your misplaced faith will be used against you to enslave you to whatever entity you have misplaced it in. And that's the history of the government of humanity across the ages. Believe in government, get enslaved by it. Believe in the king, get enslaved by it. Believe in the Khan, get enslaved by it. Believe in the emperor, get enslaved by it. Over and over and over again. Only God delivers freedom in exchange for your faith. Okay, so the numbers are in. The Democrats broke it, and Trump's gonna fix it. He won the Electoral College vote in a landslide. He won the popular vote. He won the Senate, and he won the House. That means Schumer, that idiot moron in the Senate who's blocked everything from the Republican House for the last, well, however many years, and has actually been the person sitting on the immigration reform bill. It wasn't Trump that killed it, it's Schumer. It was H.R. 2 out of the House in the first couple of weeks, as I believe, and Schumer never allowed it to come to vote. So he's been the obstructionist and the dictator and the tyrant, and since Trump won the Senate, I think it broke out as 53-46, and there was still one seat undecided somewhere that I didn't see, but they've got a clear majority. They've won the House. They have all three branches of the government now, the congressional, the executive, and the judicial. And although the judicial isn't really defined that way, with 5 conservative justices, 3 liberal, and 1 in the middle, Roberts, it's pretty much a Republican court. And they've been getting it right. This court's been getting it right. They haven't been getting it wrong. And now everybody knows we're the majority. We are the majority. The conservative populists, the centrists in this country, we're the majority. The rhinos are extreme right. The liberals are extreme left. Both parties have left the American people behind in pursuit of the money that the printing presses have enabled them to take from the corporations in exchange for their votes, which now represent the corporations, not the American people. You've been sold out and betrayed. The money is creeping into and taking over everything, just like that 1913 editorial cartoon I've shown before that shows the Federal Reserve Bank as an octopus with its tentacles entangled with every aspect of America. The government, the business, the factories, the people, Wall Street, Congress, the Treasury, it's all tied up by the monopoly on currency and credit, which needs to be addressed and reformed. But first things first, we need to kill the income tax because it's been a constitutional fraud for 60 years. So, Donald Trump won an astounding victory, as I said, seizing control of all 3 branches. That moves Schumer out of the Senate and moves John Thune in, who historically has not been a great Trump supporter, but maybe he's come to the altar. We'll see how things go here. I personally was in favor of Scott getting the Senate majority seat, but it ended up in Thune's hands, so hopefully he'll get on board and push things through the Senate, because it's going to come out of the House, go to the Senate, go to the executive, get stamped, and then get upheld by the Supreme Court just as fast as they can get things moving. And Trump is putting a cabinet in place extremely quickly. It's only 2 weeks away from the election. He's already got much of the cabinet selected, picked out, and in place. And yeah, they're young and aggressive because they're going to take down the old, wasteful, inefficient government bureaucracies and agencies that haven't been responsive to the American people and have been more concerned with their own agency, power, and budget and bureaucracies and their ability to manipulate and rule the American people rather than to represent them in service to them. So let's hope that Trump, second term, no re-election possible afterwards, can get these things done quickly and move, because a lot to do. The Democrats really screwed up the country. Not only did they kill the fact that we were net exporters of energy and oil and in control of oil prices around the world when he shut down the oil markets with killing the Keystone Pipeline on day one. He put OPEC back in control of the oil markets. It's been high priced ever since. It's now down after Trump's election. It's already under $70. In anticipation of him getting on board, reopening the U.S. energy markets and taking back our energy independence, which Biden destroyed, and then went begging to Iran, OPEC, Venezuela, and Russia to drill more oil to lower the price when they want as high a price as possible. And of course, they all told him, "Get lost, you idiot." And he's too senile to understand that's what he was being told. So, what are you going to do? He's gone. The Democrats are gone. The liberal nonsense will soon, hopefully, also be gone. because as a function of losing control of the energy market, we also became net importers of food. Diesel energy costs went up so much, a lot of farmers just said, "To hell with it," and walked away, and they're still doing so. And as a result, we produced less and had to import more, and we become net importers of food, not exporters, and it's never good to be relying on the rest of the planet for your food and your energy. That's just not good policy that works to the benefit and advantages of the American people. That is terrible policy, just terrible policy. And that's what the Democrats did. They took down American production in order to promote a global socialism. This is what they're really after, not not anything to do with a better America, right? MAGA is bad in the liberal world. MAGA was nasty. How could you want a MAGA? MAGA means make America great again. Oh, yeah, that's definitely not what we want to do here in America. We definitely don't want to make America great again. I mean, what kind of nonsense is this? How stupid can a political party be? Their motto might as well be, burn it all down. Vote for us. We'll burn it all down. So anyway, they're out. Gone. Thank God, right? Thank God. Okay, where do we want to go with this? And of course, what Trump's going to do is immediately reverse that energy policy. He's going to bring the price of gasoline down, bring the price of diesel down. That will bring down the price of fuel for all the farmers who have stayed, and may encourage some to go back into business since they've only been offline for a year or two under Biden. And the energy prices go down, the food production goes up, everything goes down. The utility bill, diesel, fuel, oil, the price of oil. And when the price of oil goes down, Iran and Russia lose their funding, which is the best weapon they have to wage the war won in the Ukraine by Russia and all over the Middle East through Iran's funding of the proxy operations of Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, all of which are being funded by Iran, and all of which accelerated their activities under the money that Biden made available to them by releasing the $6 billion that had been held, and by taking America out of energy and oil and allowing the price to rise over $100 a barrel initially, and then stabilize somewhere between, 72 and 80 for the last year or so. So it's still too expensive, and until oil comes down on a permanent rather than a temporary move, the prices in America, the goods on the shelves and the prices of food are going to stay high. And the only way to bring them down is to cut the price of the energy. Cutting energy costs cuts the cost at every single step of the production, distribution, and consumption cycle, just like artificially raising the energy costs and cost of energy increased every step of the production system from farm to home. The truck's got to pay more, the electric store's got to pay more to keep the lights on, the heat on, the air conditioning on, the factory's got to pay more for the energy. Everybody has to pay more, and that means costs go up at every single level. And the only way to get the cost to go down at the final result is to remove the cost from every step in the middle. And that's what a lower price of gasoline and diesel will do. It will make us, again, if independent and net exporters of both energy and food. And that, of course, turns the economy back on, creates job opportunities, improves the employment numbers, improves the housing opportunities, improves everything about the economy, which is what you need, because economy is energy. Energy is everything. When it's cheap, you succeed. When it's expensive, you can't. So, there you have it. That's what Donald Trump plans to do to fix the mess that the Democrats broke. And I think I hear the first commercial break coming up, so I want to encourage everyone again to visit the LibertyWorksRadioNetwork.com website, get signed up as a monthly subscribing member, and to find your way over to the tax-freedom.com website, start reading, get educated, and check out the documents at irazoom.com. We'll be back in 5. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and let's just get right back into it. I've been talking for the last couple of months, actually, for the last 20 years, about the constitutional fraud being perpetrated by the IRS, the DOJ, and the lower federal courts in the name of income tax, which is a complete and total constitutional fraud, and that fraud has been exposed by the Supreme Court in its Moore et al. Decision in June of this year. It's absolutely a constitutional fraud. There's no question about it. I'm going to explain that in just a minute. But combined with the constitutional fraud, courts have engaged in judicial legislation that between the fraud they're committing and the judicial legislation that they've perpetrated, it amounts to a judicial insurrection in the courts. There hasn't been an insurrection based on January 6th, which was a mostly peaceful protest. That wasn't an insurrection. The insurrection has been occurring in the federal courts, in the IRS, and in the DOJ, who have been arguing against the constitutional application of the income tax and for and practicing the communistic application of the income tax as a direct tax on labor and all earnings of the American people. And I'm going to explain why they've had to commit constitutional fraud to get there. But first, let's look at the constitutional fraud that they have perpetrated. For the last 45 years, the circuit courts have started ruling that the income tax is a non-apportioned direct tax under authority of the 16th Amendment. This is the position that they've espoused in their frivolous positions document for over 40 years. It's the position that the IRS asserts as its authority to make you or try to make you pay tax and file a return in their administrative correspondence. If you ask them what the constitutional authority is, they say it's the 16th Amendment. And the circuit courts all say the same thing now. And what they've done, of course, is reverse the true holding of the Supreme Court in the original case Brushaber, where the court held it was an indirect tax that didn't have to be apportioned because indirect taxes only have to be uniform under the Constitution. They don't have to be apportioned. Only direct taxes have to be apportioned to the states for collection and laid in proportion to the census. And since the income tax isn't a direct tax, it doesn't have to be apportioned. So it's an indirect tax, which makes it a function of impost, duty, and excise taxation. And the proper function of income, the Supreme Court has said, is not as the object of the tax or even the subject of taxation. The subject of taxation is impost, duty, and excise. The object of the tax are the earnings derived from any activity or transaction subject to an impost, duty, or excise tax. And the role that income plays in this indirect taxation is the role of the yardstick. Income is the mechanism by which the amount of tax is measured. The tax is owed on earnings derived from activities subject to an impost on foreign activity or a foreign person or in a foreign place, subject to a duty on exported goods, which we basically don't have. That's why we have duty-free shops at the airport, or subject to an excise on the manufacture, consumption, and sale of commodities within the country, on licenses to pursue certain occupations, both categories addressing basically alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and petroleum fuels, and a tax on the corporate privilege, where it is the privilege of incorporation that is the foundation for taxing everything that the corporate person earns. But citizens don't earn money through a privilege that they enjoy that would make all of their activity taxable. Citizens earn money by right, either the right to own property or the right to work. None of the sources taxable to the corporate person are taxable sources to the individual, the American citizen as a person, because they earn by right and the corporation earns by privilege, which makes everything they do fundamentally taxable. So the Supreme Court said in Bruce Shaber, the income tax is an indirect tax. Its function is to measure, in other cases it's held, the function is to measure the amount of tax owed as impost, duty, or excise. It's not a direct tax, and it doesn't authorize any new subjects to federal taxation. And the only subjects before the 16th Amendment were corporate and foreign, or those dealing in commodities or licenses. There was no taxation of the American public in general, and the 16th Amendment creates no new taxing powers and no new subjects to federal taxation. And since the 1960s, the circuit courts have been ruling exactly the opposite. That the Shaber court said it was a direct tax without apportionment on all sources of income of all persons, including citizens. Now, that is an absolute reversal of what the Supreme Court held. But the court in the 1960s and through the 70s, the Supreme Court, let those reversals of Bruce Shaber go unaddressed. The liberal court allowed the rebellion to be conducted in the federal courts, and ultimately around 1980, they started documenting the circuit court's positions in certain cases and invoking those circuit court decisions reversing Bruce Shaber as the constitutional authority to proceed in the enforcement of a direct non-apportioned tax, because Bruce Shaber said it was okay. So basically, they've been using third-party hearsay for 60 years, pointing to things that the circuit court said in interpreting Bruce Shaber, rather than actually reading Bruce Shaber or citing any text of that decision itself. Just declaratory, by declaration, interpreting Bruce Shaber for the country, saying it allows a non-apportioned direct tax. So for 45 years, since 1980, they've been enforcing the income tax as a non-apportioned direct tax on all sources, not subject to any limitation at all under the 16th Amendment. And again, this is the position, it's all over the frivolous position, it's a direct tax. And the reason why they've had to argue it's a direct tax is because there is no taxation of labor of the American people under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 by impost, duty, or excise. Impost taxes the labor of foreign persons, but not citizens. Duty doesn't tax labor at all, and excise doesn't tax labor, only commodities, licenses, and corporations. So how do you tax labor under Article 1, Section 8? You can't do it. In fact, the labor unions saw that coming in the mid-1930s when they put income tax, when they put Social Security tax in place. And the labor unions said, oh my God, they're going to try and tax the labor of the people. So they had Congress pass Title 15, Section 17, which specifically says the labor of a human being is not a commodity or article of commerce. And that removes labor from taxation by excise, because the only basis you could argue it under would be labor is a commodity. But if the labor of a human being is not a commodity or article of commerce, well, it's certainly not a license and it's not a corporate privilege. So there is no taxation of labor by impost, duty, or excise. You can't get the from here. Not even if you go back to the beginning. You can't get the from here. It's forbidden. And that's why they've had to argue it's the 16th Amendment that allowed the taxation of labor as a direct tax, is there's no other way to get to the argument that the federal government has the constitutional authority to tax the labors, the work to write, the proceeds derived from the exercise of the right to work, the fruits of labor derived from the application of the right to work, and the basic fundamental principle of private property, that the first piece of private property is the fruits of labor derived from your work. If you don't own what you produce in your work, you are already a slave. And that's why there is no taxation of labor of the American people provided for in the original Constitution. We're the sovereign. We're not the subject. And that, in fact, is the actual role the American people are assigned by the original legislation. They're not given the role of the taxpayer and made liable for tax on their own earnings from the exercise of the right to work. They're given the legal duty to collect tax by withholding money as tax when making payment to a non-resident alien or a foreign corporation. And then they're made liable not for tax on their own earnings, but for the tax that they collected from the foreign persons. The role the American people are given is that of the tax collector, the proper role for the sovereign. You're not the subject, you're the collector. And that's why they had to create a whole new class of collectors in 1945, the employers, who would then collect the tax from American citizens who asked for it and allowed it on a W-4. Not because there's a tax imposed, but because you asked for it. And now they put all of the enforcement emphasis on the employment relationship rather than the withholding agent, which was the original collector of the tax. And the reason why they do that is they don't want you to see that the withholding agent, the original collector of the income tax from 1913 to 1945, is only authorized, only allowed, and only required to withhold money and collect tax when making payments to foreign persons. It's a tariff, the Underwood-Simmons Tariff Act of October 3rd, 1913. Collect tax at the source from foreign persons. There is no taxation of the American people. There never has been. Your labor wasn't taxed before 1942. That didn't start until the victory tax, a 2-year temporary war revenue measure that was patently unconstitutional as a direct tax on the labor of the American people. But nobody complained. Everybody bought into the argued or propagandized argument that everybody needs to pitch in and sacrifice in order to defeat the Nazis in the European theater and the Imperial Japanese in the Pacific theater. And everybody did. American people bought in, they pitched in, they sacrificed, they did victory gardens, they did rationing cards, they did without. Everybody pitched in and defeated both the Nazis and the Imperial Japanese in both theaters, and let's face it, they did it pretty much by themselves. Montgomery and the British weren't really very much help in Europe, and tell me, who showed up in the Pacific? Yeah, I know. The Australians were there on some stuff over there by the Philippines, but that's where they were. It's like basically the Marine Corps did it all the nasty work. So what we have is a perverted system of judicial insurrection that has been unconstitutionally enforcing the federal income tax as though it were a direct tax on the labor of the American people, when in fact it is not. And how do we know it is not? Because the Supreme Court ruled in Moore that income taxes are indirect taxes. This controverts what the courts have been doing for 50 years, telling you it's a direct tax. Supreme Court says, no, it's an indirect tax. Their argument is frivolous. There's no such thing as a non-apportioned direct tax. It doesn't exist. It never has. The Supreme Court says in Moore it's not direct, it's indirect. They say it's not under authority of the 16th Amendment. It's under authority of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, which precludes it from being a tax on labor. And they say there's no such thing as a non-apportioned direct tax. That doesn't exist either. All direct taxes must still be apportioned to the states for collection under Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, and laid in proportion to the census under Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4. None of these constitutional limitations have ever been lifted or removed, amended or repealed with respect to any of the taxes that they apply to. Indirect taxes must be uniform, direct taxes must be apportioned and laid in proportion to the census. End of story. Everything the federal government was doing for 60 years is a constitutional fraud. There is no direct tax on your labor. It's a constitutional fraud. There is no such thing as a non-apportioned direct tax. That's a constitutional fraud. There's no such thing as a direct tax without limitation. That's a constitutional fraud. 45 years of judicial sedition, perversion, subversion, and actual insurrection. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network, and as we came up on the commercial break, I was declaring that we've had a constitutional fraud and an insurrection in the courts, the DOJ and the IRS. An insurrection against the Constitution, an insurrection against limited forms of taxation, an insurrection against limited taxation and limited government, an outright rebellion against the Supreme Court's original holding and the Constitution in whole to enforce not any constitutional power to tax, but literally the second plank of the Communist Manifesto in their push for the global New World Order of a global socialism. Yes, that's right, the second plank of the Communist Manifesto. It reads, and I quote, "a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax," end quote. That's where you find income tax and graduated taxation. It wasn't in the Constitution until the 16th Amendment, and graduated taxation is still not in the Constitution. It requires uniformity of taxation, and that's one of the biggest problems with the income tax, is it's not uniform with respect to its application and legal effect on the American citizens. It is unconstitutional class legislation that divides the American people into brackets and then writes different law for the different classes of persons, which of course immediately creates a system of class warfare, which is what we see playing out on the streets of America. The country has been broken on precisely along the same lines that the constitutional foundation has been broken, with half the country wanting freedom and liberty and half the country wanting servitude to the government. Faith in God or faith in government? Who delivers freedom, liberty, and truth? God or government? That's the basic choice. Half the planet believes in man and government in place of God or as God, which is what, of course, the king claimed to be, the Shah claimed to be, the emperor claimed to be. They all claim to be God, right? Right? Yeah, well, they're not. They're men, they're fallible, and if you believe them, you've made a mistake. Put your faith in the spirit, not the flesh. Okay, so, hey, does anybody else find it ironic that the Democrats let in 10 million illegal aliens, at least 10 million illegal aliens during Biden's 4 years in office, and they lost 10 million U.S. votes as a result of it? They got 71 instead of 81, and Trump, of course, got the same number of votes. What happened to the other 10 million votes, guys? Where'd they go? Is that what you stuffed the post office with in the last election? 10 million fake ballots? Then count every ballot, count every vote. Don't just count the legal votes, count every vote, because we stuffed 10 million of them into the post office. Yeah, we know. And now the numbers prove it, don't they? So they let 10 million people in, illegal aliens, and they lost 10 million votes. And of course, now the government, the liberals, are going to press the argument that, oh, the aliens don't create crime. You're much less likely to create a crime as an alien than if you're a white person. White people create more crime than the illegal aliens or citizens. I don't know if it's all white, but... And that, of course, is nonsense. It's absolutely nonsense. Do you want to know why it's nonsense? It's nonsense because all of the crimes of selling fentanyl and drugs and opioids that are killing 100,000 Americans a year being perpetrated by the illegal alien cartel gangs aren't reported. They aren't documented. Everybody knows there are millions of illegal drug sales. It would take millions to kill 100,000 people, wouldn't it? Yeah, it would. All of the drug sales are perpetrated by the criminal cartels bringing in the substance and distributing it. That's all illegal crime committed by aliens. It's most of the crime committed in the cities, all perpetrated by aliens, and undocumented and unreported. because the drug transactions aren't reported as crimes by either party perpetrating the crime. But we all know it's happening. We all know it's a crime to sell the drugs. And of course, if you don't count millions of illegal criminal transactions that result in the death of 100,000 Americans, well, sure, the statistics can be manufactured to make it look like illegal aliens aren't really committing that many crimes. But every single one of them committed at least one, right? They crossed the border illegally. Now, I'm willing to bet that not every American citizen has broken the law, but we know every single illegal alien has. So it's just nonsense that they're not committing crimes. Now, I will concede that most of the illegal aliens here aren't the ones committing the crimes. A lot of them are just trying to get by and find a better way of life because what they had where they left was just crap. So I will admit that most of them are not criminal in nature. A lot of them are hardworking and trying to find a way to fit in, become a citizen, or work hard. But that doesn't change the reality that the illegal cartel gangs are the problem. And I think the solution is pretty clear. You don't deport everyone, you deport the criminals. Whenever you encounter someone who's illegal and they've committed a crime, out they go. And you focus on the crimes that we know are being committed. The cartels, the gangs, their territorial control of the inner cities and the drug business. Get them out. Focus on them. We know who they are. Arrest them. Don't follow them to find out who the big... Take them all out. Kick out the distribution organization. So it's nonsense. No, they don't commit crime. Americans are baloney. Count all the crimes. Oh, we can't. That's right, you can't. So don't tell me they're not committing the crime when we know damn well they are. It's just not part of the statistics because drug deals don't get counted or reported. But it's actually most of the crime that's committed, isn't it? Most of the crime that's committed. Okay, so what are we going to do? Well, we obviously need a new tax system because the IRS needs to be abolished. What they've been perpetrating against the American people in the name of constitutional fraud, because like I said, they're not enforcing constitutional tax. They're enforcing the second plank of the Communist Manifesto, graduated taxation, the non-uniform taxation of the American people by class legislation that divides the American people into classes and sets them at war with one another. And each side calls out to the party politicians to step in and intervene and fix the class warfare that the politicians manufactured with the non-uniform law. And soon you have all of America, each side 50-50, constantly calling for the politicians to do more rather than represent. They're called on to rule. First to rule the other side, but that eventually ultimately ends up in them ruling the entire country. And the population in its class warfare keeps calling out for more government control and more government control and more government control. And look at what they've done just since 1960. Health and Human Services, created in 1979. HUD, created in 1965. Transportation, Department of Transportation, created in 1967. Department of Energy, created in 1977. EPA, created in 1970. Department of Education, 1979. OSHA, 1989. All of these agencies have been spawned out of so-called emergencies under executive order. Congress didn't enact any of these things. This is all done by the president ordering a new agency to deal with the problem, like energy in 77 when Jimmy Carter screwed up the oil world and lines were around the block and prices were sky high. because he didn't know how to deal with Iran, which of course ended on day one of Reagan taking office. But we got all of these government agencies that shouldn't exist. There's no constitutional authority for the federal government to be in control of energy or agriculture or transportation or housing or labor. There's no constitutional authority for any of this. And each and every single one of these agencies has grown into a huge bureaucracy that, through the regulatory deference that's been provided the last 60 years under Chevron, has let the bureaucracies become the rulers of the country, and they're so entrenched the president couldn't overcome them because he had every bureaucracy in the country fighting him the first time he was in office, Donald Trump. So what do you do with all these unconstitutional agencies that are sapping the budget, creating the deficits, driving us into bankruptcy and insolvency, which we have to fix because as goes the currency, so goes the fate of the nation. So that's why I say Donald Trump is going to reestablish the petrodollar with Saudi Arabia. That will strengthen the dollar and destroy the rest of the world's currencies probably and force them to all start hoarding dollars again to buy energy from OPEC or the United States. But all of these agencies, they need to be abolished. They should just flat out abolish them. They were created by executive order. They can be taken out. We don't need a labor department. Labor can be handled by the states. We don't need agriculture. Agriculture should be handled by the states. There shouldn't be central policy dictating corn and sugar get subsidies and nothing else. Health and Human Services, where is there constitutional authority for the government to be involved in medicine, doctors, healthcare, or insurance for healthcare? Where is that? Where is that? It isn't there. It's unconstitutional. Housing and urban development from 1965, you remember, the civil rights area where they wanted to put all the blacks in the housing projects and tell them they were being advanced, when really they were being imprisoned? And stuck with bad schools, no stores, no businesses, and no jobs, just a dependency on the welfare check in the project. In the project. It's not a prison, it's a project. Yeah, right. A liberal project to imprison you without you realizing that's what's happening. Department of Transportation in 1967. Why? So they can shut down Elon Musk? Not let him build the car that, if you're going to buy an EV, is the one you want? Department of Energy, so that they can turn off oil and gas in America to promote nonsense that enriches their friends and investors and supporters who are buying the contracts or the no-bid contracts for solar or windmill, which only lasts 15 to 20 years instead of the 30 they originally amortized across, and that, of course, makes them non-viable economically. All of these agencies should be abolished. Every single one of them should be completely eliminated. The budget for them collectively should be slashed 10%, and the money's distributed proportionately to the states under the census for each state to manage all of these areas within its own state. Agriculture, commerce, labor, health and human services, housing, transportation, energy, education, environment, OSHA, all of these things need to be state distributed, not federal, because that will result in 50 different policies that benefit each state, not one policy being dictated by the federal government to benefit the federal bureaucracy and punish the people in the states. And as a last note, do you think maybe with the Republicans owning the House, the Senate, the Executive, and the Supreme Court, we can finally pass an amendment to the Constitution that authorizes the Air Force to exist and be funded on an annual basis? You got the Army and the Navy in there. The Army actually isn't. It's only in time of war. But you got the Navy. What do you think? Think we need to fund the Air Force every year? Can we have a constitutional amendment that authorizes the Air Force? Do you think maybe after 75 years you get that done? Since it's been controlling the war and the outcome for the last 100, maybe. Very good.